This might be an uncomfortable question, but when your spouse gives you feedback and shares how they feel, maybe it's something that you did or something happened and they have feelings about it, what's your first instinct? And be really honest. Do you listen and get really curious and try to consider their point of view? Do you ask questions for clarification, validate and empathize? Or is your first instinct to give them context, prove them wrong, deny their premise, or insist that wasn't your intention? If you picked the second option, then you're doing something that's actually more predictive of divorce and infidelity. And that is defensiveness. So not only is it one of the biggest predictors for divorce, according to the research, it's also the most common identifiable communication issue. And I personally think it's one of the easiest things to identify and change, especially if your communication is struggling. So in the next few minutes, I want to share some of the most common defensive maneuvers to be aware of, how these can destroy your relationship, and then most importantly, what are some alternatives that you can use instead of defensive communication? Even if you're feeling a little bit defensive, how can you respond differently so that you can transform your entire relationship? I personally think it's a game changer if you can implement these and move out of defensiveness. It makes all the difference between getting closer and growing as a couple and staying stuck in resentment and disconnection and not being able to problem solve or get on the same team. So really quick, I just want to touch on what is defensiveness. So defensiveness is not just disagreeing. Defensiveness is the automatic knee-jerk reaction when we feel criticized or when we feel attacked, even if we're not really being attacked, but it's the perception that we are. And it's our inner alarm system screaming at us to protect ourselves, right? To protect, and we're almost perceiving them as a threat to us. And defensiveness might come from a good place, right? It might mean that you're a fighter. It means that you want to stick up for yourself. There's a part of you that feels misunderstood and you want to clarify. It might come from a place of wanting to make things right. And also we have to remember that when we move into defensiveness, our brain is really just trying to protect us, right? It's doing what it's supposed to do. And we are wired to look for danger and to identify what might be a threat and then to protect ourselves from that threat. Whether it's real or not, that's another issue, right? Because sometimes our brain can confuse the things and it can get confused about, what happened in the past versus what's happening in the present moment. And that's our amygdala can't really tell what's in the present. But even with the good intentions, the problem with defensiveness is that when someone cares about you and gives them feedback and your brain can't tell the difference between, is this a saber-toothed tiger that's attacking me in the wild, or is this just my partner saying, I wish you'd help me more with the dishes? It seems really crazy. It can trigger the same response, right? They're very different. Rationally, you can see, well, one is a threat and one is clearly not a threat, but our brain will perceive it as a threat. And it can trigger the same survival response, a request or feedback that evokes defensiveness. Especially if you have any kind of attachment trauma in your history, you're going to be at risk for defensiveness. Essentially, it just assumes that you're under attack and it justifies often taking the victim role. It feels completely reasonable in the moment, which is why it's so dangerous, because it's really easy to move into offending or hurting your spouse from the victim position. If you are going to move into counterattack as a way of protecting yourself and you're misfiring in terms of the perception of threat, you're hurting them, but you feel as though all you're doing is protecting yourself. And so this is why it's really important to be aware. How does this show up? What are the most common defensive maneuvers? There's actually a lot that John Gottman talks about, but I'm going to talk about the top 5 defensive maneuvers that I see that occur most often that you probably can relate to. The first one is just the denial defense, right? So this is like if your partner says, hey, I saw the bill didn't get paid. I thought you were going to pay that. And you say something like, I never said I would do that. That's not my job. I didn't do anything wrong, right? It's the classic not guilty plea. It's moving into trying to just deny and move yourself out of accountability. And that's your whole purpose. It's not to problem solve. It's not to understand. It's not to come up with a solution. It's really just to remove yourself of any kind of accountability. Even though there might be some truth to the feedback, that's not what you're looking for. Your purpose is in whatever approach you take is to deny responsibility for what their perception is. The second kind is to excuse. So this is, where you're making excuses, basically. The traffic was terrible. That's why I was later. My boss called and it took forever. And this one's hard because there might be a perfectly reasonable explanation for why you couldn't meet expectations or why you're getting some kind of feedback or why they're talking to you about what they're talking to you about, but it has the impact of dismissal. If there's a good reason and you're bringing up the really good reason, then there's nowhere to go in the conversation. It's a refusal to engage the feedback, right? I've just explained it away, so now there's nowhere to go, and the person that's sharing the feedback doesn't really feel like you heard them. Right? Even if you're not attacking them, even if you're not being rude about it, you're essentially structurally making it so that they're not going to feel heard, basically. And it is a form of deflection. The third most common thing that I see is cross-complaining, or what I call table turning. So if someone says, you know what, I really wish you had done the dishes like you promised, and you fire back with, well, I wish you wouldn't leave your clothes all over the floor. Right? So, or if they say, you know, didn't call me to tell me that you were going to be late, and you fire back with, well, what about you when you drive like a maniac? I could just as easily complain about that, but I'm not complaining about that, am I? Right? And so instead of addressing their concern, you're launching your own complaint, which is really unfair, because if you have your own complaint, you can bring up your own complaint, but you don't want to wait for them to bring a complaint for you then to counter complain. And it's essentially just turning the table. So whatever they're upset about, they do something just as bad. And so you're changing the subject. You're putting them now on the defensive so that you get the defensiveness off of yourself, put them on the defensive, and you never really respond to what they're saying. And so as you can see, it doesn't bring you any closer, and it only creates frustration. And this can build up over time, right? And so then eventually they may not want to even bring you feedback, which is a big red flag, because you want, in a healthy relationship, you want your spouse to feel like they can bring feedback to you because they know that they're going to be heard, and it's going to actually bring you closer, and you're both going to be glad you had that conversation when it's done right. That's how it's supposed to go. Now, the fourth one is yes butting. Yes, I know I didn't pay that bill, but I was waiting for you to make the deposit and tell me, or I was waiting for you, or this didn't happen yet. Yes, but, right? So in this one, you're acknowledging the issue, and you're not just totally denying it, but you're immediately justifying why it's not really your fault, or immediately explaining it away. So this is externalizing the locus of control. It's externalizing blame. And it may, again, feel like a very reasonable, very rational approach, but structurally it ensures that they're not getting the acknowledgement or the accountability that they're probably looking for, or at least just the, to be heard or validated. And then finally, the broken record. So this is where you just, no matter what they say, you're just going to repeat your point. They try to say it differently, and you just are a broken record, and you keep saying it over and over again, usually getting louder each time, because you believe that if they could just hear you, then they'd understand that you're right, and they would drop it. Because your goal is for them to drop it. And when you can't get them to drop it, then you're just going to keep escalating on the same, and like perseverating on the same point, essentially. The truth is that everybody's done this, right? Everybody has had defensiveness in their relationship, whether they're the ones that are being defensive, or whether you can recognize this because your spouse is being defensive. I know I've done these moves before, but they really do damage the relationship. And the reason why they damage the relationship, I want to touch on this first. There's 4 things that defensiveness does to damage your relationship. The first is it escalates conflict. If every time you get defensive and you're basically just deflecting, you're turning the conversation into a battle. As I suggested before, you're perceiving them as a threat, and so they become your opponent. So they bring something up, then you counter or turn the tables, and now they're on the defense, and now it's just a two-way attack, and no one's listening. You're just arguing back and forth. This is why feedback has to be a one-way street, because a dialogue, when it comes to this kind of thing, it's like you're trying to bypass one person actually getting what they need to repair and to turn the page before you take turns. For the same reason, this is why it escalates conflict, is it just basically is now you're fighting, and each person is getting more and more frustrated, and now emotions are getting charged up, and that makes it even harder to hear each other. It also blocks empathy, because when you're defending, you're not listening or understanding. You're not coming from a place of curiosity when you're in defense mode. So you're missing a chance to understand, to have an insight, to care, or just simply put yourself in their shoes, which goes a long way, because if you can put yourself in their shoes and even just understand what they're saying from their perspective, that will disarm them, right? Then they feel heard, and then they don't have to keep going with it. And it's really essential for a healthy relationship to have the ability to empathize and to hear what somebody's saying without defensiveness. It also blocks repair. So if they never feel heard, you haven't repaired. If they brought something up that left them, it didn't sit right with them, and they're bringing feedback to you, and you move into defensiveness, and they get frustrated and they shut down, and then maybe a day later you just move on, right? It never got resolved. It just got swept under the rug. This is going to accumulate over time. It's going to grow resentment, and it's also going to inform their filter of you the next time, right? The next time something comes up, they might come in with guns blazing because they're expecting not a great reaction, Or they might just shut down because they don't think that you're their ally and they just assume it's not going to do any good. I might as well just keep it to myself, which you definitely don't want. If you're somebody who's thinking, well, as long as they don't complain and as long as they're not giving me negative feedback, I'm fine, right? Because I just want there to be peace. You're setting yourself up for your spouse getting to the point of no return at some point, right? It's not a good sign if your partner is just stuffing their feelings because they just don't trust that they can bring things to you and have that go well. That's not a good sign. You might be getting short-term peace out of it. You might think, okay, they're not hassling me right now. But for the long term, what you're settling for is a relationship, really in essence, where you're okay with them feeling not repaired. As long as they're not bothering me, as long as I'm not inconvenienced and I don't have to do the mental labor of listening to them, then all is well, right? And you're really disregarding their feelings. And for the long term, that's not going to work in a healthy relationship, right? There will be a price to pay for that, even if it's more down the line. So the next time something comes up, you want to make sure that you're making the effort to really hear what they're saying and look at it as repair, right? It's not just about getting out of the hot seat. It's about, oh, this is an opportunity to repair, which brings you closer. That's what creates emotional intimacy. That's what creates trust. And that's what puts you on the same team. And it changes your entire filter of each other so that you're less likely to be defensive or even have issues with each other in the future. So there is a huge long-term gain in that. And then finally, the reason why defensiveness ruins your relationship is because it creates opposition, alluded to with the moving into opponent mode, and now you're fighting and you're escalated. Instead of being partners working together, you're adversaries. You're defending yourself, which means they're a threat, they're your enemy, they're not on your side. If they were on your side, if you perceive them to be on your side, then you would just get curious because you would feel like you have nothing to lose. And if you think about it, being defensive, has it ever solved a problem for you? Now, I honestly would be curious if you've ever been defensive or your spouse has been defensive and you feel like it worked, that it actually made a difference in your connection. I've never experienced it personally, and I've never seen it in my work with clients. I personally think it usually always makes things worse. I would love to hear if I'm wrong, though. I'd love to hear the exception to that. I can learn from that too. But the goal is to prepare yourself and have a skill set and be in the right mindset to be able to hear feedback without getting defensive. So what do you do instead? What are the alternatives? How do we do that? How do we move into non-defensive listening? So there's 4 game-changing strategies that I would recommend. There's more than these, but these are the 4 that I feel like if you can do these, this will change everything. Then you can refine things, and I can do a deeper dive on this, but this is plenty, and this will be very impactful if you can learn these. So the first one is to hit the pause button. So the moment you feel defensive, you just want to stop. Take a breath. This is going to require cultivation of self-awareness. What is happening in your body? Are you feeling tension? Are you feeling heat? Are you feeling the urge to fight back? When you have that really fast knee-jerk reaction, that's what you want to be aware of. And just acknowledging it is what's going to give you power over it. It will rule you if you're not aware of it, right? It will take over and you're unconscious. Your brain is offline. Your prefrontal cortex is not there. Your default mode and your old habits and your history in the relationship is what's winning, which is not constructive. Cultivating that self-awareness and being willing to pause. You have nothing to lose by pausing. No response is better than the knee-jerk defensiveness. You don't have to have the perfect response. You don't have to know what to say. You can just pause. You can even also say, you know what, I really want to hear you, but I'm feeling defensive right now and I need some time. Buy yourself some time to get into the right headspace. You don't have to respond right away. You never do. And in fact, that's one of the things I teach is that when your spouse comes to you with feedback, or if you want to come to your spouse with feedback, it has to be a consensual conversation. You both have to agree to that conversation. We are now having a repair conversation, which requires one person is listening. And if you're not ready for it and you're caught off guard and they come to you, it doesn't mean you have to instantly be ready. And you have the right to buy yourself some time and pause. You can also say, you know, I really do want to hear more and I'm just really distracted right now. Could we talk tonight when I'm better able to receive it? And then that way you can prepare, right? Get yourself in the right headspace and moving out of that automatic reactive mode when you're in a whole brain state and you're really conscious and mindful about how you're responding. The second thing is that I think is super powerful is to find the grain of truth. Now, this might be hard if you automatically disagree with their interpretation of something, but you don't have to agree with their meaning making. What I really want to recommend that you do is to, instead of focusing on how they're wrong or where you disagree or giving them context or trying to highlight a misunderstanding or explain, instead you just want to ask, okay, what's the grain of truth in what they're saying? There's always something, even if it's tiny, even if it's 1%. What is the truth in what they're saying? Maybe your intention was good, but the impact wasn't. Right? So if you know that you're a good person and you know that your intention was not what they're thinking that it was, you will have the opportunity to share your perspective and to explain where you were coming from later. But that's not going to be your first response. It's sort of like when you bump into somebody in public by accident, maybe you accidentally step on their foot or you set their chair on their foot or something. And as soon as you know that you've impacted them, what do? If it were me, I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, right? Even if they got in my way, like maybe I could say, well, they got in my way and so I don't need to apologize. Well, I still stepped on their foot. It still hurt. It wasn't my intention, but I can still say that I'm sorry. Now, obviously, if it's a stranger, it's really easy in that situation to not take it personally, right? It's very easy to know that I don't have to defend myself. I know that it was a mistake and I can just say that I'm sorry. That's the mindset you want to cultivate with your spouse. It's almost like a beginner's mind. You're kind of have to remove the history, especially if you do have a complicated history with repair, but try it. Like, forget about your intention, focus on the grain of truth. Something impacted them in a way that maybe wasn't your intention, but that's not the point. So how is it true and how could it affect them? And look for the truth and join them there, because that's going to disarm them. That's going to make them much more likely to hear your perspective later. If you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I could see how that would have hurt you, then that disarms them. They feel heard. Then after that, you can say, where I was coming from, let me share what I was thinking, right? So you don't have to negate their perspective. You don't have to negate you don't have to negate anything they said. You can just share your perspective. They have theirs and you have yours. And this is an important distinction, because I think a lot of times people think that being non-defensive means that you're not going to stick up for yourself, or you're not going to explain, or you're not going to share, especially if there was a misunderstanding. They might have made really different meaning out of it. You might have had a legitimate misunderstanding and you want to clear that up. That's not the same thing as being defensive. What's being defensive is focusing on that first, instead of first just acknowledging what they're saying and joining them through the truth initially. Okay, so it's really about timing. The third thing that I think is really powerful too is if you can remember the mantra of don't give pushback, just paraphrase. Paraphrase, don't push back. So instead of defending, you just try to say back to them. So like if you're like, I don't really know what to say about that, just start with telling them what you've heard to make sure that you got it right. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that when I was late, you interpreted that as I'm not considering your feelings. Is that right? And give them the chance to tweak the message or correct it if it's not right. Because a lot of times we're hearing it wrong. If we paraphrase it back and they hear it and they're like, well, actually, that's not actually fair, or that's not actually totally true. Let me rephrase that. And it gives them an opportunity to be more clear, to be more precise, to not be globalizing, which can be more constructive, right? Because sometimes when people are bringing stuff to us, they are doing it in a more broad strokes, not very nuanced way, right? It could be done in a very bull in a china shop, I'm going to paint everything with one brush kind of way. And then when you paraphrase it back to them and they hear that, then they have the opportunity to walk something back or to clarify, because now their brain is telling them, okay, they're trying to understand it. So I don't need to be heavy-handed. I can take a minute and I can tweak my message and I can adjust that. Or if you get it right, then they can say, yes, that's right. Now you can respond. But what's powerful about that is that now they're already now looking at you as someone who is seeking to understand as opposed to arguing with you. And so anything that you say after that is just going to land better, right? Sharing your perspective or validating or acknowledging is just, all of it is going to go so much better after you've done this one thing. It really is kind of magical, because unconsciously it turns you into their ally. And now you're a safe person for them emotionally to explore together. What meaning did that have for you? And then we're together in this. I want to understand it. And then that way I can be more mindful in the future and I can be more aware of how that's going to land for you, right? So it's not giving up who you are. It's just bringing your A game for somebody that you care about. The fourth thing that I think is really powerful is, and I touched on this already, is share your reality without attacking theirs. So this is the part where you're sharing your perspective without negating theirs. I get this question a lot. What can I do if I disagree with their interpretation? This is the biggest thing. Like, well, I don't want to be defensive, but I don't agree. You can explain your experience without being defensive. It's just, like I said, first of all, it's a matter of timing. You have to acknowledge first, and then you can share your perspective. But if you just lead with validation and start with like, I can see how that landed. Thank you for telling me that. This is huge too. That's very disarming. I'm really glad you shared that with me so I can be more aware going forward. Then you can say, here's what was coming up for me. Here's where I was coming from. Or can I share my perspective on that? Or that's not how I experienced it. I have a different interpretation. And that should be okay in a healthy relationship. Sharing your perspective does not take away from what they've said. It's only when you do it right away, when you haven't first sat with what they've brought you before you do that. That's the thing you have to keep in mind, because that's the common mistake that people make is like, I'm trying to repair it, but you went into explaining yourself too soon. And then the final thing that you can do is to consciously remember that they are your ally. This person is on my side. This person, my spouse, is bringing this up to me to clear the block to connection that they feel because they want to be closer to me. Defensiveness comes from feeling like you're being put down or insulted. But if you hear what they're saying, not as an attack, but through the lens of like, this person's on my team, how would you hear it differently? So think about it. Think about an example right now of a time where you got defensive, where you got feedback and you felt like, you know what, they're criticizing me and I don't appreciate that, right? They're misunderstanding me. They're overlooking all the other things that I do right. If you change your filter and you look at it as, this is my spouse who loves me, who wants to be closer to me, and they're bringing this up because they want help clearing out the block to connection, because they want more closeness with me. And you look at it as a compliment, as a bid for connection. How does that change how you would hear that? Can you hear the positive intent in what they say? Can you hear the efforts that they're making to communicate with you in a way where they're not criticizing? Especially if it's something that they're really working on sharing their feelings without criticism. Can you really hear that? Can you screen out projections of attack or criticism and hear it as a share about them? What are they saying about them? What are they sharing about their meaning making, about their needs, about their requests? That's all I need to find out, right? And can you hear what they're saying as a bid for connection? It changes everything. Maybe you've had a text message that you read, you think you're disconnected, you think you're on bad terms, you think they're mad at you, and you read a text and you hear it through that lens. But if they left you a voice message and they had a certain tone and they said something in a way that you could hear their voice, the tone is coming through and you realize, oh, they're not mad at me at all. Now you can hear the words differently just from the tone, right? It's the same thing. It's your filter is changing. Tone helps change your filter. The words that we use change our filter. But the good news about this is this doesn't rely on your partner in how they bring anything up. This is something you can control. Your own filter is something that is on your side of the street. If you practice this, it's really interesting because even if they come at you wrong and you insist on hearing it through a really positive lens, like I'm going to respond to you as though you came to me with good intentions to reconnect, and I'm going to respond accordingly, you'll create that, right? It's sort of like being stronger than them. You're not responding just in kind necessarily, which is understandable if you do, but it's really a power move to be able to be like, I'm not going to let how you come to me now or any past way that I might have perceived that be stronger than my choice to hear it in the way that I want to hear it right now, right? It's sort of like the idea of when we change our core beliefs and then we start to show up in alignment with those beliefs, our energy changes, how we talk changes, and then that attracts the thing that we wanted all along, and it attracts the thing that would confirm that belief. But it's almost like we had to make it true on the inside first before it's going to then be reflected on the outside. And it's going to be mirrored back to us over time. It's the same idea. You change your filter of how they're saying stuff to you. You refuse to hear it as a criticism. What would happen? I mean, it might be an interesting experiment to try that. Now, with all 5 of these approaches, they really work because, and this might seem backwards, but you actually, unless you're with an abuser, now there's the exception. If you're with an abuser, this does not apply. But if you're not with an abuser, you're safer when you lower your defenses emotionally. Why is that? Because instead of creating an enemy or treating them like an enemy, you're creating an ally. You're inviting them into the same side of the table with you. When people feel heard and understood, they soften and then they listen to you, and now you're connected. And now you can problem solve, right? And you can really hear each other, and you have nothing to lose except ego by getting curious, by learning more and just listening. What do you have to lose? You might think they're wrong. You might think they're saying something bad about you. But if you set that aside, like, so what if they are? I'm just going to set that aside and we'll deal with that later, just temporarily. I don't have to fight for my reputation in their eyes. If you really look at it like that, gosh, I have nothing to lose. Put down my armor, get curious, learn more, listen. And then they're going to soften, and they're going to also be really grateful that they feel heard, and they're going to want to reciprocate, right? That's one of the laws of reciprocity. They're going to want to then also understand your perspective, or to apologize for their part too, or to be like, I can see it from your side as well. If you've ever had those kinds of conversations where it's like, look, I'm sorry for that. Here's what was going on for me. Then they can hear that and be like, thank you. And you know what? I'm sorry for how I reacted, right? So like, it's just easier. It's just so much easier to have successful conversations when you put down your armor. And remember, even if you disagree, you can hold your truth. You can still be relational while you're holding your truth. You can understand how something is landing or being interpreted by your spouse, even if that's not how you would interpret it. That is the meaning of being relational. Now, this might take some inner work, but when you're really strong and you have really good internal boundaries and you have healthy sense of self, good core beliefs about yourself, and you've healed from any past trauma, you won't have the need to protect yourself from feedback from somebody who loves you and wants to be close to you. You're not going to perceive it as like, oh my gosh, now I need to go in fight or flight mode. And that's a blessing. That's like the whole point of intimacy, right? That's what people want. We are wired for connection. We are wired for primal attachment and safety. That is healthy, well into adulthood. But it can start with our own defensive reactions. And if you can practice these, and even just one of them, if you got really good at one of the 5, I think it would be a game changer for your relationship. So I want to leave you with this challenge, okay? First, I want you to identify what are the maneuvers that you think you use most often of what I shared. And you can even put that in the comments. I'd love to see that. I want you to work on looking for opportunities to notice the next time you have the impulse to be defensive. Start to develop that self-awareness. Start to be on the lookout for feedback. I'm ready for the next time my spouse says something to me, and I'm going to try to practice noticing myself feeling defensive and pausing and not reacting or trying one of these other things. Don't worry about stopping it right away. Just notice it. Notice what your moves are. I really do think that awareness is half the battle. Like, that is the first step to change. And then once you start breaking down those defensive walls, I think that you'll be really amazed at how close your relationship can become. When you remove that biggest block to connection that is a predictor to divorce, what would be possible? So the choice is yours ultimately. When you choose to work on defensiveness, you want to ask yourself the question, do I want to be right and walled off with a sad spouse, or do I want to be connected and on the same team? And if you can have that question be guiding you in those moments, I think you'll make the right choice. That's it for today. If you like my content, please take a second and either like this video or subscribe to my channel, or both. That will help us reach the people that really need to hear this stuff.